All right, welcome back, all you Kambalers, magicians, and magical malcontents, for a little bit of long-form content that I know you've all been so very juicy for since it's been a while. It is me, 60 Skills. I am here in beautiful Carthage at the local Movenpick pool. And so today we're going to talk about things you shouldn't really do in magic. All right. Just like in any other endeavor, there are any number of things that you really shouldn't do because, well, to be blunt, it's just plain a bad idea. What are some examples of this, and why would you not want to have anything to do with these things? All right, first of all, I'll pick up with my favorite whipping boy, or girl as you will, and that is the 72 spirits of the Lesser Key of Solomon, or the spirits of the Goetia. Additionally, you have something that is known as blood magic. In general, a lot of the older religious forms tend to be a rather bad idea as well. And by this I mean the Babylonian, Phoenician, and other sorts of things. Having anything to do whatsoever with the Fae. And in general, the more, let's call it, manipulative forms of magic. And let us not forget, but least, the issue of animal alchemy, particularly in terms of things like homunculi. So let's talk about my favorite thing not to do, which is invoking the 72 spirits of the Goetia, or the Lesser Key of Solomon. Why shouldn't you do this? Well, first of all, they're rather grungy, which is a fancy way of stating that they're sticky and they're old and they're really dirty. Now, some of you are out there under the misconception that if you have your access to your own Akasha, you can simply make these things go away. And while this is true to one degree or another, they tend to be remarkably sticky. So I will tell the story of an effort I was involved with a friend. A friend was running a business. He had a bunch of deadbeats who owed him money. It was quite a bit of money. I won't say exactly how much, but as we get into this story, you'll realize it was a lot. So he came to me, and I went and looked up one particular entity of the Goetia that was considered one of the less spicy of the pantheon, if you will, and began to invoke this entity. As I referred to it, I called this demonic power debt collection. In other words, they were going to pay, or, well, they were going to pay. And pay they, in fact, did. In fact, my friend recovered about $60,000 of the money that he was owed in relatively short order. Now, for a variety of reasons, I decided to stop working with these entities, not the least of which was one of them rebounded on me because of, well, let's just say somebody had access to some protective amulets, and these things have to play by those rules. So I decided I was done, and I let the entity go. Okay, I did maybe half a dozen workings with this entity over a 6 to 8 week period. 5 years later, I can still feel it in my mental field if I look for it. So again, these things are very sticky. And if you think you're getting anything free from one of these, think again. Okay, item number 2 that you should absolutely never get involved with is blood magic. Well, here's the thing. Blood contains a lot of etheric energy. Okay, that makes working with certain kinds of magic relatively easy. But it's something you're getting from a living being, and generally speaking, not something it gave to you voluntarily. Whether this is chopping the head off of a chicken or chopping the head off of a small child tends to vary a little bit over time. But because of this, the entities associated with blood magic are, well, let's just say a little on the dirty side. And dirty entities tend to be rather sticky, which once again, once you've made contact with these things, breaking with them altogether is a little rough. Additionally, because they work at the level of the etheric, that means they're operating at the near physical. If you think you're just going to wave your hands and make one of those things go away, well, I've got another thing to tell you, because it's kind of like arguing with somebody that water isn't wet. You'll find out the hard way. Okay, third category of thing that you should never, ever have anything to deal with are the Fae. Sometimes these are referred to as nature spirits. Again, the problem you run into with these things is they're near physical beings, which means they're a real pain in the ass to deal with. They're extremely sticky. They can work a lot of magic, actually, that goes into the physical on a certain level. And because you're probably not very good at that, there's not a whole lot you can do. You see, here's the thing. When you train something like Akasha to be able to get rid of entities, most people are only training at the mental or high astral level. So if you run into an etheric level entity and you try to use your Akasha on them, it's probably going to laugh that off, which means you're going to lose. Now, contrary to what you read in a lot of these stories involving the Fae, they're not so much running off with your small child into the never-never. Generally speaking, they're going to take your mind, and you end up in a kind of catatonic state that you can never come back from. Now, as you may have noticed if you studied a lot of psychiatry, this was a much more common phenomena in earlier ages. Why? Well, it turns out electricity, radiation, these things, they do a pretty good job of disturbing a lot of etheric influences. So in general, it's going to make these things want to avoid you. And you're typically only going to run into them in wildlife scenarios or in very uninhabited type regions. That said, if you go looking for them, you will probably find them. The problem with these entities is they're very legalistic, which is a fancy way of stating they have a lot of rules. But the rules don't make any sense. And because you're probably not particularly etherically powerful, you are going to be at a loss in dealing with them. In fact, if you go back and read a lot of fairy tales, in general, your odds of coming away from the Solomonic crew with something in your back pocket tend to be a lot higher than it is with the Fae. Interacting with the Fae and human beings, even magicians, even powerful magicians, is almost always a losing principle. And so for this reason, you should leave them the hell alone. Okay, now we're going to talk about ancient religions. Well, as I've mentioned in the past, magic isn't constant in terms of how it works. Neither is karma, which means a lot of grungy stuff used to go on. One of my favorite examples of this is it took the church, as in the Christian church, telling the Europeans they weren't allowed to murder off their unwanted children for 800 years before there was enough demand signal for an orphanage outside one devoted towards military personnel needed to exist. It took the church 800 years between 400 AD and 1200 AD for the Europeans to stop murdering their unwanted children in numbers long enough for there to be a need for orphanages to exist. In fact, how did you know you had found a den of prostitution when exhuming ancient ruins? Well, because in the Roman world, there would be this cylindrical pit, okay, where they took the newborn male children that belonged to the prostitutes, snapped their necks, and threw them into the pit. Yeah, that's pretty screwed up. My point being is, whether you're talking Mesoamerica, the ancient Romans, or any other number of places, these really old belief systems frequently engaged in a lot of behaviors that aren't super user-friendly. And if you think you're going to divorce the astral aspect of the entities involved from that behavior, think again. Okay, finally we're going to get to one of the other dark corners of the magical world, and we're going to talk about animal alchemy. Yes, this is that third rail of alchemy that nobody wants to deal with. Okay, most people will deal with plant alchemy, and then they tend to skip right over to mineral alchemy, the oils of gold and silver and blah, 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 blah. skipping over good old animal alchemy. Okay, the most powerful forms of animal alchemy actually involve your own blood. So that's something to keep in mind. That does not stop people from using the blood of other animals or the blood of other people. Things like homunculi and the rest are in fact real. You can engage in these behaviors. They are scary. They are powerfully empowered etheric level entities on many levels, or they have a lot of etheric level magic, which generally means you're going to be the loser engaging with these things. Yet another good reason to simply not get involved. Now, animal alchemy, if you're talking the use of actual animals, can be quite interesting and tends to be very astral in nature and very potent. But you can see how this can come to some dark corners of the interwebs, if you will, pretty easily. And finally, I will come to my favorite category of magic to never, ever, ever, ever get involved with, and this is manipulative magic. Here's the thing, kids. Even when people have no training whatsoever, they are very sensitive to being worked. And if you get a reputation for working others, which you will if you engage in this kind of thing, sooner or later you're not going to have any friends and nobody's going to want to deal with you. If you really go the extra mile, you'll notice there's a nasty tendency of the various cult leaders out there to either spontaneously disappear or meet with the bad end. People do not exist for you to play with. They are not your playthings. They do not appreciate this. They do not like this. And if you do it often enough, they're going to find a way to get even with you. And keep in mind, no amount of iron palm qigong you do is going to stop a 9mm round. And 9mm rounds are a lot more common than your iron palm. So these are a few of the things that you should never, ever, ever, ever get engaged with. Now, on that note of things that you should get engaged with, keep in mind Magic Camp is booking up, so check out magiccamp.click. In particular, we still got a few spaces left for the June event in Spain. So if you've ever wanted to come study with yours truly and see what all this stuff is like in person, come on down and check it out. Otherwise, as per usual, train hard and be well.